Good evening, and welcome to Kappa Epsilon Fraternity's debut GoToWebinar event. What you need to know, tips and tricks to land the perfect residency or industry fellowship. My name is Jenna Meglio, and I will be serving as your moderator this evening. We hope that you find this topic of value. This webinar is being co-sponsored by Kappa Epsilon Fraternity, Kappa Epsilon Foundation, and the Alumni Interest Committee. The objectives for this webinar are to describe the process for obtaining postgraduate residency or industry fellowship, to provide insight into managing the recruitment process, and to provide example interview technique and questions. Before we get started, I just need to cover a few housekeeping details. Webinar recording, slide deck, and questions will be made available on the KE website. Please mute your phone, microphone, and turn off your camera. We welcome your questions. Type your questions into the GoToWebinar question box on the right side of your screen. Any questions that are not answered during the session will be answered by our presenters and posted along with the slide deck on the KE website. There will be a short survey emailed after the webinar. Please provide us feedback. Our speakers for this evening are Dr. Mary Ann Billiter and Dr. Lauren Klaus. Dr. Billiter is the Pharmacy Manager, Patient Care Services for New Hanover Regional Medical Center in Wilmington, North Carolina. Dr. Billiter has served in various capacities on both Kappa Epsilon's Grand Council and Foundation Board and is currently a member of the Alumni Interest Committee. Dr. Lauren Klaus is a medical science liaison in immunology for Bristol Myers Squibb and is based in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Klaus is serving on Grand Council and is the VP Communications. I welcome both of you to the panel tonight, and at this time, I'd like to turn the program over to Dr. Billiter.
Thank you, Jenna, and I'd like to welcome everybody as well to joining our first webinar. And tonight, Lauren and I are going to talk to you about gaining and grabbing the best fellowship and residency that you can. When we first start out, let's look at what some of the differences are between a fellowship and a residency. When you look at the fellowships, industry fellowships, they tend to have a more global scale, either through our country or even across the world. The knowledge areas will vary depending on the functional area with which you're in, whether you're in regulatory affairs or potentially working as a medical science liaison. The industry fellowships tend to be 1 to 2 years in length and have experiences in their core areas and potentially other rotations. It is more of a corporate practice setting, but you will have areas of teaching, research, and publications. How does this differ from a residency? In residencies, you tend to have more individual cases or are looking at more of a health system type scale. You have direct patient care. They're structured as a 1-year general practice residency or your PGY1s with a 2nd-year specialty or PGY2s. The practice setting can either be inpatient in a hospital or outpatient, or you could actually do both, have inpatient and outpatient experiences. Again, there will be activities and teaching, research, and publications. Both areas do have competitive stipends. When we look at residency programs over the past several years, you can see that there's been a general increase in the number of applicants, but also an increase in the number of residents. However, the number of residencies has not kept pace with the number of applicants. This slide is depicting the residencies that were matched versus the participants. And as you can see, there's many more participants than residencies. When we look at those that go unmatched every year, we're starting to see that more residencies are having less unmatched spaces, but there's still a significant number of residents, around 800, that do not have, who do not get matched. If you look at this, where the yellow line is, in the Phase 2 match, this is a new program that's been put in the last 2 years by ASHP. So for those individuals who do not match during the first round, that there is a secondary match or Phase 2 match that occurs about a week later. So there's kind of a cooling off period. Everybody can relax a little bit, review more applications or review more programs, and then go back for doing more, usually phone interviews, but there could be some on-site interviews going into the next phase of the match. So are you ready to go to the mid-year? And this is a big time looking at the ASHP mid-year of where you would do some of your initial screenings and looking at residencies and the industry fellowships. So if you look over your initial recruitment timeline, in the fall, this can happen in late September or October. Attend local showcases and job fairs. Where we may be out displaying various residencies and fellowships at. Here's a good time to be preparing your CVs, get people to look over it, have your preceptors look over it, and also be thinking about letters of recommendation and lining up who you'll have doing your recommendations. And we'll talk a little bit about recommendation letters a little bit later in this presentation. In November, you'll also have some industry fellowship days and networking days with some of the different fellowships. Be looking at these and going out and seeing what's available. And then in early December comes the ASHP mid-year. And this is where a lot of the recruitment and initial interviewing really occurs. You have the residency showcase, the personnel placement service, and especially for the industry interviews, you may have first and second round interviews and various receptions out at the mid-year. Then we have, and we'll talk about all of these a little bit later on. Late in December and early January, this is when your applications are going to be due. Make sure you do hit those due dates. And also, as you're looking at your recommendations, make sure that the people writing your recommendations are also able to meet these due date deadlines as well. In January, we'll really start the interview season. Residency interviews will be scheduled and conducted, usually starting in mid to late January. And for the industry fellowships, you'll start having on-site interviews, and even offers will be made during January. As we go into February, you'll continue with the residency interviews and looking to March to have the match and the secondary match. So I'm looking for a residency, and I'm out at the mid-year. If I'm PGY1, be attending the residency showcase. And this is where you're going to have a lot of your primary contact with these residencies. PGY2 residencies or the administrative residencies will be conducting interviews within the personnel placement service. You also need to attend the residency showcase. You may have some PGY1 residencies in the personnel placement service, but this is not going to be the primary place where they're looking to meet or interview you. They will be looking for you out at the showcases. So what do I bring to ASHP? Make sure you have copies of your CVs and also some business cards. You'll want to dress professional, but have very comfortable shoes. The personnel placement service and the residency showcase are very large rooms that there'll be a lot of walking in them, and they are usually at the ends of the convention center, so it'll take you a lot to actually get to those as well. So make sure you have comfortable shoes. I know those 2-inch heels may be really cute, but they may not be very functional when you actually get to the mid-year. The residency showcase, and how do you navigate this? Have a plan. All I can tell you is get a plan. Go to the ASHP website. You can utilize this link, and it will list all of the residencies that we'll be displaying and when they will be displaying and their location within the showcase. This year, out at the mid-year, there will be over 1,000 residencies will be participating in the showcase. That in itself could be very overwhelming. Each residency will have one time slot in the residency showcase times. So it can be either Monday afternoon, Tuesday morning, or Tuesday afternoon. If a residency has multiple programs at it, so say like the residency I'm affiliated with, we have PGY1 and we have 2 PGY2 residencies. We will have all of those residencies in a single showcase. Know what you're looking for in a residency. Are you looking for certain geographic areas? If you are, go through those residencies, know where they are at the showcase, what days and times that they will be displaying. Also have questions for them. Know what you're looking for. Do you want to be in a residency that has 2 or 3 residents in it, so a small program, or do you want to be in a larger program, one that has 9 residents, or even some residencies now have up to 20 to 30 residents in their programs? Are you looking for academic medical centers? Are you looking for community hospitals, or somewhere in between? So make sure that you think about those kinds of things as you're going into the showcase. Have questions prepared that you want to ask the residencies. Always make sure that you take time to speak with the residents who are there at the showcase, because they're the ones who will be able to tell you what it's like on a day-to-day, what their day-to-day activities are, and then also being able to make the transition from a student into the residence. And Lauren, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Marianne. So now if you're looking for a fellowship, we're going to cover a little bit more about what that entails at mid-year and beyond. So there's 2 different types of fellowships. There's your traditional fellowship, and that's usually providing training to become an independent researcher. And that also usually follows the PGY1 and PGY2 residency training. And then there's the industry fellowship, and that's what we're going to focus in on a little bit more tonight. So these are developing your skill sets to work in the pharmaceutical industry. And these programs, they can be standalone or they can be affiliated with academic institutions. So there are large programs that are either through programs like Rutgers or MCPHS in Massachusetts that have, that are, like that, like I mentioned, with an academic institution. But there's also programs that are, when I say standalone, I mean with a specific company that don't have that larger program with multiple companies involved. And the recruitment process can be a little bit different. So as you start researching, really make sure that you've looked into, don't just assume, I guess the way that you're going to be recruited is the same across all. A little bit more about industry fellowships, just to give you an overview. The other thing you want to think about is what type of fellowship do I want and what kind of area do I want to be in? So these are 4 very broad buckets, just going through each of the large teams that you could be on. However, each company may recruit different positions from year to year. So again, really doing that research beforehand is important. So under the research and development bucket here, you can see there's opportunities in clinical pharmacology, preclinical, early phase and late phase development, and clinical operations. Under medical affairs, there's also a variety of things that you can interview and be a part of, which could include medical strategy, medical information, medical science liaison, publications, medical education, or HEOR, which is the health economics and outcomes research team. Commercial, this is your marketing, market research, advocacy and policy, market access and business development teams. And then regulatory affairs, this is advertising and promotion, some more of the regulatory strategy, drug safety, and risk management. Also, like we mentioned before, there are ways that you can be involved in across some of these different teams, and some of them may be rotational opportunities with 1 to 2 years in one of these buckets, or could be across. So really making sure you understand what type of program and then what type of industry fellowship into these 4 buckets going in that you'd be most looking for. So this is talking a little bit more about the entire process for fellowship. So like we kind of mentioned as well, so pre-mid-year, this is when this showcase and research phase is really important, and you will sign up for your on-site interviews at this time. And these on-site interviews, that's what I mean, the on-site at mid-year interviews. So what you'll be doing is there are certain things like a fellowship networking day, or, there may be showcases locally, but that is all kind of done beforehand in this process, not at mid-year like for residency. So whenever you go to mid-year, you're there and ready to interview with the fellows and preceptors, as well as the companies, and the larger programs will have receptions. So that's really your time that you need to be prepared to have those first conversations, those interviews, as well as you'll have your CVs, your business cards, and that's something a little bit different for fellowship as well. So I would suggest about 50 CVs and business cards, because you'll be giving your CV to every single person that you interview with, as well as you'll be writing thank you cards on site to leave as well. And then how do you select that program? That's up to kind of your what you're looking for, whether it's university or it's independent company related. So after mid-year, you will be obviously looking to gain an on-site interview. So how do you pass that paper review once you've submitted that application?
So when you look at, people frequently ask us, what are you looking for in a candidate? This was a study that was published in AJHP a few years ago, though it actually asked preceptors what are the most valued characteristics of the residency program directors and the preceptors of their candidates. Well, first off, we have the written communication. In looking at your letter of intent, do you have knowledge about the program, and can you articulate why you were interested in, one, doing a residency, but also why are you interested in that particular program? We'll look at your CVs, highlight any kind of transferable skills. So have you worked, not worked, and what kind of skills and things did you do on your rotations? But most of all, have other people read your letters of intent. Make sure that there's no grammar or spelling errors. This is something that we do look at, and grammar and spelling errors in a letter of intent could be enough to make us not want to interview you. To put you in to back up a little bit, to put in perspective of how many applications can a residency program go through. The one that I'm affiliated with here at New Hanover Regional Medical Center, we have 9 residency spots, and we get upwards towards about 90 applications every year. So we have about 10 applications for every spot, and we're only going to bring on-site somewhere around 4 to 5 candidates per spot that we're interviewing for. And so you can see that we're going to make a big cut just here in the application process. So again, looking at your letters of recommendation, choose wisely. We'll be looking for clinical rotation preceptors, and especially those who you've had in patient care areas and direct patient care preceptors who can talk to what are your skills and knowledge base, and how do you interact with patients. Well, also other things to look at is if you work and where you've worked, having something from an employer or a supervisor. If you have worked for or affiliated with professional organizations such as Kappa Epsilon, if you've held a leadership position within your chapter, look towards potentially your advisor who could write a letter of recommendation. They can attest to your leadership skills and how you interact in big groups. You would also want to know from the people writing your recommendations whether they're going to give you a positive recommendation. And be very specific when you ask them, will you write a recommendation for me? And will that recommendation be positive? I tell a lot of students that I can write a recommendation letter, but it may be neutral. It may not always be positive. So you do want to have those positive recommendations. Again, at the end of the recommendation, the person writing it will have to say whether they recommend you for the residency or whether they highly recommend you for the residency. And just that difference between recommend and highly recommend, again, will be looked for as we are screening our resident candidates. In forecast, there is a field in there that many programs have put as a mandatory field in the letter of recommendation, where we're looking for areas of improvement that the candidate has. So some of those we'll look at and we're like, I don't exactly consider that an area of improvement. And what one person may think is an area of improvement, I may actually think is a positive trait. So we do look at those, but those are not necessarily things that will automatically get you screened out. We'll also look at the rotations that candidates have taken. Where are those rotations at, and what were the quality of the rotations? So how many different patient care rotations were done, and how many have you done before you go into actually doing the interviews? If you are looking for an industry fellowship, they'll also be looking to see if you've done any rotations in industry. Always include what you've done in those rotations, but also remember, if you do rotations at a site where you are looking to do a residency, that is considered an extended interview. We do look at our site, we will reach out to our preceptors that we know that students have been at and ask, how was that student while on rotation? And that in itself, how you performed on a rotation, can put you in the mix for an interview or even put you to the side. Additional assets, work experience. This can be important in some states, as you may need additional work experience outside of what you get from school and the hours of rotation for school. So do know what the Board of Pharmacy requirements are in the different states in which you are applying. Professional organizations, whether you are a member, whether you are a leadership role, I can tell you in every interview that I sit in, the first thing I look at as I scan through, I will always go to the professional organizations, and I'm looking to see if anybody was a member of KE. And you can bet I'm probably going to ask you about something you've done in KE during that interview. But I can tell you that is something I always go and look at very quickly. Make sure that you fill out all parts of the application. Don't cut corners. There is some redundancy in the forecast applications, but we will look for all parts to be filled out. So what are some lesser valued characteristics? Well, ironically, in this survey, the RPDs, or the residency program directors, said GPA was not highly valued. However, most programs have a minimum GPA, that if you don't meet this GPA, that's the first cut for it. And that will vary from residency to residency. It could be a 2.75 overall GPA, or it could be a 3.0. They may also look at what is the GPA overall in school versus what is the GPA in certain classes, like your therapeutics classes, or potentially rotations. Now, there are some schools out there now that are pass-fail schools, and we do take that into account as we are screening our applications. So in those schools, there is no GPA, but we do look at that and do account for those. We will also look in case there might be publications or presentations. A number of students now have 4-year degrees before going on to pharmacy school. So were there any research opportunities from that previous degree that may have led to either publications or some types of presentations? We'll also look at the APPE rotations. What kinds of presentations or assignments did you have on those rotations? Community service. This is also something we look at. And it may be something that you do on your own, or is it something that you do within your organization, such as KE? And exactly what is that? And what did you do? For my organization, where we are doing more out in the community and more volunteerism among our own employees, this has become something important that we do look at, because this will also be an expectation of our residents that we match. So we actually look for more than just participating in a run or a walk. Have you had any teaching experience? What are some of the tiebreakers? So they could be ranks from schools, have you received national awards, or any types of scholarships. So now that you've actually secured the interview, now what? And what are you going to do while you're on site?
So just some brief interview tips across the board. First, make sure, I think we've said it over and over again, research, 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 and be wary, though, of over-researching. Just remember that whenever you're talking to someone in an interview, they do expect you to be, definitely prepared. However, if there's conversations that you all have not found, but you found additional information about them or their program, or not necessarily their program, but you found things maybe online, make sure that you're wary that, you've had these conversations before you say, maybe I found XYZ about, too many things about maybe personal things online, etc. So then bringing hard copies of CVs for each interviewer, that's important. You'll get a list before you go on site that will very nicely detail who you're interviewing with, as well as this is your kind of schedule for the day. Make sure you're bringing business cards, account for any traffic or anything that may come up. Make sure you're arriving early. Of course, dress professionally. This is business professional attire. And then finally, relax and be yourself throughout the whole interview process. So for these on-site interview schedules, what would they look like? These could include anything from a site tour. This could be lunch with the residents and fellows as well. You may be meeting with human resources, behavioral interviews. We'll get to some of these questions in a little bit, but sometimes panel interviews are becoming more popular. So instead of you just having multiple one-on-one interviews, it could be a group of people that you're talking to at one time. Utilizing the STAR method, we will also go through in a moment. And then finally, these are specific to residency or fellowship. So for residency interviews, you may have mini cases or case presentations. For fellowship interviews, you may have to do a writing sample or an on-site presentation. And that is the on-site presentation also for PGY2s may come up. So the STAR interview method, this is basically for a lot of these behavioral questions that kind of would start with something like, tell me about a time when. Here's a great way that you can really frame up your question and make sure that you're answering the interviewer's question, but kind of delivering at the end how did this impact, either the situation, your service, etc. So the S stands for situation. Give the interviewer a little bit of information about the situation. They were not there whenever you were, so make sure they understand who was there, what was going on. The task at hand, it would be the T here, the action, A, and R result. So for example, if you got a question that was something along the line of, tell me about a time that you worked with the team, make sure they understand what this team was, what the task the team was doing, the action that occurred, the way that you may have worked well on this team or helped solve an issue, and then don't just leave it at that. I think this R is the one that really brings it home. Make sure you give some type of result, whether it was successful, whether it wasn't successful, and the more specific you can be, really the better. A few more interviewing tips. So make sure you have questions for the program. There's a few examples that I like, or what changes do you plan to make in the next year? What are your strengths and or weaknesses of the program? And you may have multiple questions, and these can be everything from, you could be very specific and have certain ones for the residents, understand more of their day-to-day, but then also have different ones for maybe the program director. But just make sure you have at least a question that you can ask everyone. Here's some tripping points, though. Make sure you kind of think of these as well. Please do not make any derogatory comments towards, especially if you're looking at, in the case of residency, especially in a hospital setting, et cetera, towards retail pharmacists, any derogatory comments toward patients in general. Definitely do not want to, say anything that would basically, negate some of the other things you're saying throughout your interview about how helping patients, et cetera. Making sure you're also, I know I said be comfortable and make sure that you're being yourself, But whenever you're spending time with these residents or fellows, this is still part of the interview. So even though it may be a tour and it's not a sit down formal, make sure you're not too casual. Finally, social media can definitely ruin a good interview. Make sure that you have, you're the right self that you want portrayed in these settings, because people can easily go online and search and pop up everything from your LinkedIn to your Facebook, etc. Finally, background checks and drug screens. Some programs do look at this before the match. So just something that may happen either on site, and they, just so you know. And so finally, we put together a few frequently asked questions that we have gotten before. So Marianne and I will tag team kind of the fellowship residency take on a few of these questions. And then, as mentioned at the beginning, Jenna said that we have, she mentioned that we had the questions where you could type into our go-to meeting here. So if there are any questions, we'll take those right after we kind of go through a few of these. So I can kind of kick off the first question for how many programs do I apply to and how many do I rank? So as part of the fellowship experience, this greatly depends on if you are looking geographically or if you are looking greater. For example, within the Rutgers program, there could be about 100 different fellowship positions recruiting. This could be across about 20 companies. So if you have one company that has one interview spot, that may be something to think of, keep in mind, versus a company that has 15 spots, and there could be a little bit more variety in the type of fellowship. But ultimately, I think within Rutgers, they recommend, I think, about 8. And then outside of that, you just need to make sure that you have scheduled your interviews in a manner where you're able to get to the next interview. They're usually in about 30-minute increments. So it sounds great to fit in more interviews at mid-year and do back-to-back. However, you remember, you need to grab water, get to the next interview. So it's nice to leave 30-minute increments between. So really doing that pre-work and kind of narrowing it down. And then ultimately, after mid-year, you'll have your first rounds, and that's usually with the fellows, and second rounds with preceptors, and then receptions. And then once you've kind of determined where you've gotten in that process, then you'll kind of understand at that point how many to apply to. And then at that point, then once you've done gotten and finished your on-site interviews, then it will be you'll be getting those offers in real time. There's not the ranking process associated there. So Marianne, what do you think about for residency programs? How would you answer this question?
So I think for residency programs, it's really however many you are interested in. So I don't know that there's really a good number. I know some people who will just apply to 2 or 3. Others may go out and apply to 10 of them. So I think it really just go and apply to as many that you feel that you would be comfortable at. And then as you start getting the interview requests in, that's when you can really start narrowing it down. And it really depends on how many on-site interviews you feel you can do. And you're going to have to balance this between your rotations that you're on, because they're going to be time away from your rotations, and then also the travel to get to the interviews. Because in a residency interview, the candidate is expected to pay for that. So the site doesn't pay for that. So you're going to have to pay the travel, to whether it's driving or potentially a plane ticket. And overnight, if it's far away, you may have an overnight stay, so we'd need to pay for a hotel as well. While you're at the interview, the site will give you lunch and plus minus breakfast with that interview. Kind of depends on when they start. So because of the fact that you're going to have to pay for the interviews, the amount of interviews you go on is really up to you and what you think you can afford. So applying, I'd say go ahead and apply to as many as you feel that you would be comfortable at, and then start narrowing those as the interview offers start coming in and being able to get those scheduled. to go on for those after you've completed the interviews and you need to decide how do you rank them. I think for the ranking of the residencies, again, I would rank every residency that you interviewed at that you could see yourself at. So if you go out on 5 interviews and you see that you could be at all 5 of those, then go ahead and rank all 5 of those. For the candidate, though, you need to rank them in the order in which you would like to be at them. Because through the match process, the preference always goes to the candidate and their ranking and not the site. You both have to match, but all preferences do go to the candidate. If there's a place that you just absolutely do not like, do not see yourself at, then I would not rank that site.
And kind of off of what you had mentioned, the funding travel for interviews. And so on the fellowship side, then you are expected, of course, to get yourself to mid-year. But for those on-site interviews, if you are asked after you have applied to come on-site, then that is when they would be funding. Most of the time, they would be funding those interviews.
So how about your CV? I frequently review CVs for the students that come on rotation with us. And I think it's like, how long is my CV? Is it long enough? And I don't know that there's any really good answer in how long your CV should be. What you need to put on it is what are the things that are important, but also don't put on things that are just fillers because you think you want to have another page. So definitely things to highlight would be your rotations. Where were your rotations? Who was your primary preceptor at that rotation? And then what did you do there? Make sure that you have your work experience, but do think about what work experience you put on there. We will want to have definitely your work experience at pharmacies. If you worked at other places throughout college, you may want to kind of think about that a little bit. I've seen some CVs come through where people worked at more bars than they did at pharmacies. And so we kind of look at that and try to think, what are we getting with this candidate? You would also want to highlight definitely any professional organizations that you were with, and again, community service and any scholarships or awards that you might have gotten. And for everybody, that's going to be a different length in the CV. So put on what's important, but don't put in a lot of filler. Lauren, you have anything?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think something that's important, though, is that you definitely need to have a strong paper CV, but make sure that you know what's on there. And if you've included things like presentations that you did your first year of pharmacy school, or, that you understand, you still would be able to describe, that presentation, because anything on your CV is definitely fair game for questions. And that being said, how can you kind of pick out the most important things? And that may be position dependent, but a lot of times you'll walk into, especially at mid-year, these fellowship interviews. For example, within the Rutgers program, you will have signed up for that interview potentially on Saturday at noon that day and be in an interview at 2 o'clock. So you will walk in, you'll hand, the interviewer your CV, and they wouldn't have had a chance to necessarily look through your entire CV there. So they're looking at it the first time. So the first question may be something like, tell me a little bit about yourself, while they're looking through your CV, and making sure that you have a few things that, as you're kind of, introducing yourself, things that may help orient them to your CV as well. And then the second, I think this is something that goes across the board, but just making sure it's very clean, that you've had, of course, people proofread it, and that it's just clean and nice for the eye to follow, and making sure kind of formatting is similar across the entire document, because that's something that can definitely distract from all the accomplishments that you've completed. If you're seeing a lot of differences in grammar or spelling mistakes too.
Absolutely. And I can tell in interviews, I always like to pick something off of the CV and ask the candidate to tell me about it. So we've talked a little bit about funding for the interviews, and so thank you cards. That's always a question that we get about writing thank you cards, and whether you should do handwritten thank you cards or emails. So Lauren, I'm going to let you take this one.
Sure. So I know I had mentioned bringing lots of thank you cards to mid-year. So during the fellowship process, you will write, specifically for the Rutgers program, there's a little basket, and after your interviews each day, so between interviews or after them, you write your thank you notes and can put them in that basket where they are given on site. So that is a great opportunity for those written thank you notes. However, once you have left mid-year, you've then applied to the program, gotten an interview. These interviews then are the beginning of January. They're early January, and you can get an offer very soon after that. This isn't like the match program where there's a specific day in March. It's very rolling. So you could interview on a Monday, and they could offer their first candidate, the position Wednesday, Thursday, et cetera, throughout the week. So that's when I think email becomes really key, because you may leave an interview and they may be, making an offer that week, for example. So as soon as possible after the interview, on site for fellowships, I would recommend emailing. However, people definitely, appreciate a handwritten note, et cetera, but just time is a little bit more of the essence on the back end there. Well, whereas you're there in person for the written thank you cards at mid-year, and you can do them right then.
And I think, for the residency programs, I think thank yous are important. And I don't know that there's a real preference of whether you send thank you cards back to the residency or whether you send an email. If you do send an email, make sure that that goes to the residency program director, and they can either forward that around to all the other people who are involved in your interview, or again, you can send the written thank you cards back. You do have more time for those, so it is something that you can mail in, because again, we're going to be looking towards the match, which is going to be sometimes toward at the beginning of March when that has to be in. So a lot of programs will have wrapped up their interviews somewhere by the third to fourth week of February, so you may have time to get those in. So Lauren, we talked a little bit about receptions and attending receptions out at the mid-year. So I think these are a little bit more important for the industry fellowship. So why don't we I can talk a little bit about the residency programs, and then how about you talking about the industry ones? So for the residency programs, as you're going through the showcase, you may be invited to a reception where if you've done an interview in the placement service, at the end of that interview, the site may invite you to their reception. I would encourage you to go to the receptions if you are invited to them, if you are very interested in that program, because again, that is still part of the interview process. And some programs, some very popular programs, may look at, well, I invited them to the reception, this candidate to the reception, but they didn't attend. So that in itself could be used as a screening. But also at the reception, it's a little bit more casual. But remember, it is still part of the interview process. So you, again, want to be there. You would still want to be professional there, but if you do get invited to the reception, that is for you to attend and not you and your friends to attend. So do realize that these are still part of the interview, and that you should be going on your own with that. So Lauren, how about the industry receptions?
Yes, the industry I do second that they are definitely still part of the interview. So At mid-year, Friday is the arrival day for fellowships normally, and interviews start that Saturday. And so Saturday, Sunday are usually first round interviews, whereas Monday and Tuesday are the reception nights. So Monday is usually when the companies have a lot of their interviews, and these are in the evening. So these are after a long day of, interviewing, walking around. The second, also comfortable shoes and staying hydrated and making sure you're taking care of yourself because they can be really long days. And the other catch with that is a lot of them are at the same time. There's a lot going on between that 6 to 9 kind of time frame. And so really sitting there and mapping out where these are, especially in cities where they don't have as many venues close to each other. So you may have to cab or between different venues. So making sure that you know where they are, you planned out your time, and you may be having a great time at a certain interview or, a certain reception talking to someone, but kind of creating a time schedule for yourself so you can really make sure that you are attending all of them. Because like Marianne said, if you aren't attending those, especially in industry, you want to make sure you're going up and talking to the preceptors and the resident for the position that you're interested in. Maybe even mingling. A lot of times there'll be maybe past fellows or other preceptors, et cetera, that, have more insights about the program or that company. However, if you don't attend, then that can look like you're not interested in that position anymore, and that you're not interested in kind of continuing forward. And then the second night, especially in particular, I guess, the Rutgers program, there's one large Rutgers ballroom where all companies are going to be in the same room. So at that point, you also need to make sure for the programs that you're still interested in and that you're still wanting to be in the running for, that you're speaking to all the different programs, all the different specific companies, whether it's preceptors, residents, or fellows, et cetera. So I definitely, I think a lot of it is making sure that you're taking care of yourself all day as well, because it can be a long day, and making sure you're hydrated. And the other thing I think is important is, yes, they are a more casual setting, and it's a great time to get to know, get to really understand how maybe that team works together, and how you definitely fit in with their culture, but making sure that you're also not talking about what your plans are later in the evening, potentially after the reception, or really kind of outside of that unprofessional or outside of that professional bubble.
And also, I would caution at the receptions, a lot of time there is alcohol provided at them. Do beware of how much you drink. Stick to the water, because it's, again, is still a professional setting.
The last thing I just want to mention real quick. Oh, with some of these, sorry, one quick thing. You'll see the handouts provided here. We have included a list of interview questions that are some of the most common ones that you can download and look through as you start to prepare. All right, Jenna, on to you.
Yes, thank you. Ladies, that's been very helpful. Thank you. We've had some really good questions. We have a couple questions that have come in, so we're going to jump to those right now. And our first question tonight says, what if you cannot attend mid-year? Does that hurt your chances of getting a residency? So I think I will turn that over to either one of you, whoever wants to jump in first.
I think from a residency standpoint, we do a good bit of recruiting out at the residencies, but I think also another good venue is residency showcases and or that you may have, whether those are sponsored by your schools or by state organizations. Here in North Carolina, the North Carolina Association of Pharmacists has a residency showcase with their annual meeting. I know the South Carolina Society of Health Systems Pharmacists does as well. So I think if you're not going to be able to make it to the mid-year, then it's important to be at those residency showcases. I think it's also important to go to those showcases in your P1, P2, and P3 year, because sometimes, especially for some of the local students, we may have already seen you a couple of times out at the local showcases. So if you don't attend the mid-year, that's perfectly fine. But I think if you're very serious about a residency, that you really do need to get to the mid-year and attend the showcase.
And on the fellowship end, then mid-year is really your time that you are interviewing. So unless there's like extenuating circumstances or something along that line, and you've reached out to them and made sure that that is something that they can accommodate for, really mid-year is a requirement. However, FIND is it's the Fellowship Industry Networking Day for the Rutgers program. And other programs may have booths, et cetera, at other places, but that's your time to really narrow down which programs you want to, apply to and where you're interested in. However, that FIND event is not required, and that's usually in November. This year, I think it's actually in a few days at the end of the week on Friday. But that is not required. However, just highly suggested because that's your time to really understand where you want to be, what you want to do, but also people are under the they understand that this is an event that people would have to fly to that is located in New Jersey. So depending on rotation schedules or any other limitations, that may not be possible for everyone.
Okay, I'm going to take it back here for a second. We have another question that's come in. If you are currently in the process of working on a publication, would you put it on your CV as in progress or leave it off entirely and bring an updated CV to your interview if you were extended one?
I can take that one to start with. My take on that would be I would put in progress, and then you can, of course, update it to, taking off the in progress and giving all the details once you've finalized that project. But especially for, if there's at that point you don't have, if that's your really only, poster or publication experience, then that's something that at least you'd want them to know that you're in the process of working on and trying to gain that experience.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would, say that it's in process and then update it. Like if by the time you get to your interviews, it's been submitted, then I would update that to say that it's submitted. After it's been reviewed and accepted but not published yet, you could even, put that on your CV that it's accepted, but you're just waiting the publication, the actual publication of it. So I would agree to go ahead and put that on your CV.
Okay, thank you for that. We have another question here. It says, oh, I'm sorry. We have another question that's come in. It says, hi, I am a PPS for a PGY1 residency. My mentor recommended that I do since I would like to apply to programs out of state. What are some things to expect or prepare for during PPS? Ladies?
I think if you're looking for a PGY1 residency and you're going through PPS, these are going to be 30-minute screening interviews in PPS. So I think you need to be able to articulate within these 30 minutes what you're looking for in a residency and why you would like to do a residency. And look at things, why is it that you want to do a residency, and are you committed to the residency, and then why are you looking at that particular program? Part of that time within that 30 minutes, it usually goes about 15 minutes of you talking about yourself and having interview questions, and probably the next half of that interview will really be kind of the program selling themselves and telling you about their program and things like that. But I think you also need to be prepared to go to the showcase and also be going to the showcase. So if you do a PPS interview, I would also go to the showcase as well to that same residency, because there may be other people there and they may or may not have their residencies. We typically see PGY2s or more involved in the PPS. And again, it would be the same thing. Why are you interested in that specialty? And then why are you interested in that program? And especially in the PGY2 residency interviews, you're likely to have the current resident there, so you will have some time to be able to ask that resident some pointed questions about their day, working with the people at the hospital who may be part of that team as well.
Okay, great. We do have another great question that's just come in. It says, I think this will be going to Dr. Klaus. It says, regarding preparing letters of intent for fellowships, do you have any recommendations for how to structure your letter or what resources to use in the creation of the letters for each company?
Sure. I highly do not recommend Googling letters of intent and utilizing kind of a formula like that you see on that you necessarily see online. I think that the important thing whenever people are reading through a letter of intent, what I know I'm looking for is why is this person interested in this company? Why are they interested in this specific position or this area? And then do they have some of those experiences to kind of back that up? And it doesn't need to replicate your CV by any means there, but just kind of giving this is the time that you may be able to give a little bit of background about why you're a little bit more interested, or this could include you had a rotation in this field and you realized that you were, wanting to pursue that long term, or maybe if you were not able, that's the thing. A lot of times it's hard to get an industry rotation. So maybe this is the time to say you might have some transferable skills, or you had rotations where you also still realized that you were interested in industry. But I think that company to company, just make sure you're not using also a standard letter company to company. I would definitely make sure that you're doing for each individual one that as customized as you can to that position about why you're interested in that specific position.
Thank you so much. We've got two questions that have come in on community service. We're looking at how many hours are looked for, and is it valued less than employment?
I think for community service, I don't know that we're looking for a certain number of hours that you would do for community service, because one of the things we do recognize is that you're still students and that you are doing that, and you're likely that you do have to work as well, and it's hard to balance all of that. I think work experience is valued more than community service. So places will look for both of those, but I think really your work experience is probably going to be valued more than the community service.
Lauren, do you have any comments to add on that?
No, I definitely kind of echo Dr. Billiter there.
And we have one last question we'll take tonight, and then we'll wrap it up. As a current first-year student, what steps can I take to make my CV stand out for when I apply for a fellowship? I have heard about doing internships during the summer. Is this a major factor in getting an interview?
So I can start here, I think.
Yeah.
Some of the ways to think about your CV is your first year, there's a lot of different exciting opportunities on campus, but really taking a step back and thinking about what you're interested in, and not just being a member of every organization, but over, the course of your 4 years, are there opportunities for, leadership development and, leadership positions there. So I'd caution against, just signing up for everything to kind of pad your CV, but what you may be interested in. And I know you were also asking about internships, and I know some schools, they do have, you've got your rotations in the summer, so it could be difficult too, but that's something to at least, start looking into if that is a possibility. Or the summers may also be a good time to get in some work experience as well. Maybe if you're interested in community service as well, could also be a good time to do that.
I would agree. I think it's you want to take the opportunities that you have, but you don't want to take so many opportunities that it takes away from school and academics. I do see a number of candidates that come through who has been an officer in 3 different organizations on campus and may not have the strongest GPA from that because they were so involved that it did take away from some of their, the classes and the schooling. And I think it becomes a balance of doing those kinds of things, but remember, you're still in school. You do need to have the grades because at least for the residency programs, there's going to be a minimum GPA that you have to meet. And so you don't want to really be on the borderline of that because you put so much emphasis into the community service and professional organizations.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, we've come to the time where we are going to get ready to wrap up our webinar. I would like to thank Drs. Billiter and Klaus very much for their time tonight. On behalf of Kappa Epsilon Fraternity and Foundation, I would like to thank you for joining us this evening and hope that you found this topic helpful. Please remember to fill out our post-webinar survey. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. And remember, you can always find Kappa Epsilon on any one of these social media platforms. And at this time, before we close and wrap up for the night, we just have a few announcements from the KE National Office. Convention website and registration is now open. Early bird registration deadline is February 28th, and when registering, don't forget to order your convention t-shirt. Also, be sure that your chapter submits a history and philanthropy poster. We have a deadline coming up for the Zeta Cooper Scholarship on November 15th. You can find information and an application online in the KE members logon site of the website. On November 30th is the deadline to apply to the for a KE Foundation Education Grant. That information can be found on the website as well under the Foundation tab. And finally, don't forget to submit your promotional video for the competition for the deadline of December 15th and to let us know what Kappa Epsilon membership means to you and your chapter. There's a $100 Visa gift card up for grabs for the winner. So at this time, we thank you once again, and this concludes our program for this evening. Good night.